This is Tara Graham reporting for the Real News Network in Baltimore City, Maryland. The challenges facing Baltimore are both numerous and daunting. Entrenched poverty, a dysfunctional police department, the highest tax rate in the region, and the highest rate of violent crime. It's an array of problems that don't appear to have easy solutions, but solutions are exactly what the residents of Baltimore had in mind when they elected Catherine Pugh, the Democratic nominee for mayor. Which is why Real News reporter Stephen Janis sat down with State Senator Pugh to discuss all these topics and what she plans to do about them if she wins in November. Stephen, thanks for joining me. So can you give me a little bit of background on Catherine Pugh?
Yeah, sure. She was first elected to the city council and interestingly lost to former Mayor Sheila Dixon in 2003 when she tried to run for city council president. And then she took an interestingly different path than a lot of mayors. She went to Annapolis. She was appointed state senator and then eventually won the election. And so she's really built a power base for herself in Annapolis, not in Baltimore City. You know, Dixon, Martin O'Malley, former mayors, Stephanie Rawlings-Blake, current mayor, all rose up through the council. But Pugh went to Annapolis and was state Senate majority leader there. And so her power base and her sort of career has evolved in the state capitol, not in the city.
So you started off your conversation with a topic that's in the news right now, police reform. What did she do in Annapolis about civilian oversight in particular?
Well, she was heavily involved in the legislative process that produced this supposed package of police reforms that we're now dealing with at the moment. And one of them, of course, is a very controversial idea to put civilians on the internal disciplinary boards called trial boards. So she was part of that, and she was actually one of the architects. So it's been very, now that has hit a roadblock where the union says they will not include or do not want to include civilians, as far as we know, I asked her about that specifically.
So number one, do you support having civilians on the...
Absolutely. I remember I co-chaired the Police Reform Commission for the state of Maryland and absolutely do support civilians on the trial board. And what the Judiciary Committee did was left it open for jurisdictions to negotiate doing that, but allowing for that to take place. Here in Baltimore, as you well know, it's become a negotiating factor for the police union. And I think that what we'll do this session is I will ask the state legislature and the Baltimore delegation to take it out of the negotiations and to require individuals, citizens, to be allowed to sit on the trial boards. It is absolutely important to developing that trust that we know needs to take place in Baltimore City, and to develop that kind of cooperation that I think that even those who are against it currently will see the difference that would make down the road. And sometimes, when we resist things, we don't know what the final outcome will be. But I believe that when we mandate that through the state legislature, that the city will benefit in the long run.
So you're going to go and advocate for this in Annapolis?
Absolutely, without a doubt.
Doubt about that.
Without a doubt.
Next, you discussed a topic that's been front and center, the Department of Justice scathing report on the Baltimore Police Department dealing with unconstitutional and illegal practices. Now, you asked her what she plans to do about it, but I think she told you how it made her feel. Let's hear her answer.
Well, let me just say that the report, I think everybody in Baltimore City and perhaps in the state of Maryland should read the report, because it does point out some of the systemic racist practices that have existed in our police department for years. And I tell you, some of the stories that you read in this report are just shocking. I mean, just some of the ways that African Americans specifically were stopped, frisked, searched, cavity searches. There's stories about police officers putting their hands down the pants of individuals, and I think it was appalling. And it's certainly, as the report pointed out, things that just should not have occurred, that violated constitutional rights of individuals for, a decade. I mean, it's just appalling.
It really struck you as something you want to change specifically?
The stop and frisking. The stop and frisking, I just think, was out of control. I mean, when you think about women, not just men, but women, young people who were subjected to that, mentally ill people who were subjected to that. I mean, I don't think that there's a category across the African American community or our community in general that was not touched by this. And so that has to stop.
She seemed pretty firm about stop and frisk. Why do you think so?
Well, I think she personally, because I asked her, what part of it really affected her. And I think that part, the idea that people are constantly being harassed, this idea that if you go into a poor African-American neighborhood and you just stop and harass and engage and continually put pressure on people, that something is going to change. And that was where she seemed to go beyond being a politician and maybe talking about, you know, the quality of life in these neighborhoods. So I think she sees, too, I got the sense that she also sees that it causes deeper problems, and some of the problems that you're actually trying to solve, like violence, if you have a constant police presence that continues to harass and otherwise, you know, impede people in those neighborhoods. So I think to her that was a real personal thing. She said that's got to stop.
Now, you asked her if she would keep key city officials like Police Commissioner Kevin Davis and Housing Commissioner Paul Graziano. Why did you focus on those two jobs specifically?
Well, two reasons. The police department is the biggest agency, the best funded agency, and obviously the, unfortunately at this point, pivotal agency in Baltimore City. So whoever runs the police department is probably the second most powerful city official and one of the most instrumental, important picks of the mayor. So that was one. Number two, with Graziano, with Paul Graziano, housing commissioner, we're all aware of the scandal that happened at Gilmore Homes where women were asked to, you know, have sex in exchange for repairs. It was a national scandal. It led to a major lawsuit settlement. And many people have said it's time for him to be fired. So I wanted to see what she had to say when she becomes mayor. Will she fire him?
Commissioner Davis, is he going to be your commissioner?
Commissioner Davis, to me, has the capacity and the propensity to do the job.
Paul Graziano, a lot of people want him fired.
I think that's an old issue.
So are
in
you
the
going to
city.
fire him? Or?
Let me just say this. Everybody serves at the pleasure of the mayor. And I get to say on day one, you know, I'll accept everybody's resignation because I want the best and the brightest. And one of the things is I'm looking at the Bloomberg School of Government. You know, we combine HABC with HCD. We're one of the few cities that do that. And so not only will I be looking for a housing commissioner, I will be separating, currently, as I see it, separating HABC from HCD.
Oh, you'll be, so people understand, you'll be separating the Housing Authority of Baltimore from housing development, or what?
Yes, because one is a federal agency,
Right.
And the other one is for community development.
So you're going to split those two apart and bring one?
I'm looking at
Okay.
that now with the Bloomberg School of Government to see how best to do that. Because when I look at,
That's really interesting.
well, when you look at Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago, New York, every major city, those agencies are separated.
Now, Stephen, given that in the scandal, dozens of women were asked to exchange sexual favors for repairs, why do you think Graziano's been off limits?
I think that is $1 million question in Baltimore City. I mean, you know, Mayor Stephanie Rawlings-Blake did not fire him. He has survived since Mayor Martin O'Malley in 1999. He's the longest serving person. One interesting thing she said was, well, number one, that she's going to fire everybody. So we'll see what that, I mean, that's sort of de rigueur, sort of political, you know, talk. But number two is that she's going to split housing authority, the federal part of it from the city part, which gives her more control.
The next question was about Port Covington, namely the $535 million tax break, as well as a new deal, which is a $100 million deal made between City Council President Jack Young and Under Armour CEO Kevin Plank. Let's hear what she had to say about that.
I think that Port Covington is going to be a great deal for the city. I think when you think about all the lessons that will be learned from Port Covington, the jobs that will be created, the transportation needs that will be met, some lessons that we can learn from that. You know, again, a lot of Port Covington will occur long before I become mayor, but I am looking forward to, you know, the assets that will be returned to the city as a result of the investment that has been made.
Do you have any concern? I mean, it's a huge tax break. I mean, I know people say TIFs aren't tax breaks, but they really are tax breaks.
Well, but there are tax breaks to be given to other parts of the city, and I think that that's what we need to be looking at. How do we fix West Baltimore? You know, we've got look at what's happening up in Park Heights. You know,
Sure.
And one of the things I've said to Park Heights, you've got 65 acres of opportunity for development, and over the next 15 years, we got a potential of about $120 million coming into Park Heights. That ought to be leveraged to bring in at least $1 billion or $10 to $12 billion in investment in the city, because we got to take that. We should be taking that money and leveraging with development in the city. So there's a lot to be done, and Port Covington, I believe, is the tip of the iceberg in terms of some of the things that this city can do in the future to repopulate a city, again, built for 1 million people in downtown city.
More TIFs you're talking about, or more?
Well, more incentives. More incentives for development, more incentive. We've got incentives. When you think about Park Heights, $120 million in incentives over the next 15 years that could be leveraged with other development. Absolutely. You'll have the same thing going on down in Pigtown and other areas of the city because the slot race impact dollars. So we need to leverage those monies and create the incentives to get that development going on.
Finally, you asked her about ways to address systemic issues like poverty, specifically increasing the minimum wage. Let's hear what she had to say about that.
Well, I'm not. First of all, it's not a part of my agenda currently, but I can tell you this: that it will be a part of the state's agenda, and it will be a part of Hillary Clinton's agenda by 2020. That's where we need to be. And so, I think that we want to make sure that it is statewide, that we don't lose, that Baltimore doesn't lose in the process. We want people to live better, but the one thing that I want to do with training dollars in the city is give it to the employer to say that if that's a $10 an hour, if that's a $20 an hour job, let us help you with the training dollars so that we can train people so that they can move up the economic ladder, because at $10 an hour, $15 an hour, it's still not sufficient. So we've got to do better by training our people in our city, for the better jobs. I mean, we have them coming to the city, whether it's Port Covington, technology. So we've got to put our money where our mouth is in terms of where we place our training dollars so we can improve the economic outcome for the people who live in our city.
So you do support $15 an hour for statewide?
Absolutely.
For state, you do support
I just don't think that any jurisdiction should be separated from this,
but
because
statewide you support it.
Absolutely,
Okay.
it's going to be there, and again, Hillary Clinton supports that by 2020, and so I think that we get there. But you have to be conscious, citywide and statewide, how you go about doing this and at what level. City, and we know that we have a high unemployment rate in this city. We know we have a drug addiction problem in this city, but we also know that many of the problems that this city faces just don't lie at the doorsteps of Baltimore City itself. And when you think about, for example, Baltimore now, as I call it, the drug treatment center for the state of Maryland, we have more drug treatment centers here than any other jurisdiction in the state. Anne Arundel County got its first drug treatment center. I mean, but if you stop people on the streets, and I do this when I'm having conversations with homeless people on our streets. I don't give out money. I might give out a bottle of water. I'll say, well, where are you from? They're from counties surrounding our city. I mean, not to say that we don't have homelessness in our own city, because we do. But they're from all, and as far as Virginia, and I asked the young man, I said, well, why are you here? He said, I think I'm going to make this home. So we've got some major problems in our city, but they're not just laying at the doorsteps of Baltimore. And that's why I think the relationship that I have with the Baltimore County Executive, the Harford County Executive, the Howard County Executive, to be able to have the Anne Arundel County Executive, to be able to have this conversation about how do we work together to make sure that no one jurisdiction has to pay the price for all of these ills that are occurring in our communities and communities around the state.
Are you going to ask them to do more with these problems and to have their own drug treatment, things like that?
Not just to do more, but to do more, but to understand that this is not just Baltimore City's problem.
Do you think she has enough of a grasp of the problem to be able to address it in a meaningful way?
Well, one of the things I think, and I can kind of understand this answer, is that she wants it to be addressed on the state level. She wants a $15 minimum wage, but she doesn't want to put Baltimore in isolation. And this might relate back to her ties to Annapolis and the fact that she is not a person who sort of rose through the city ranks, but actually had to be in Annapolis, which actually might not be a bad thing for the city, because truthfully, I think $15 minimum wage, everyone says it's absolutely necessary. However, if it's only Baltimore City, again, it's something that's going to put us in this position where we're going to be the only ones taking this step. So I think this has to do with her Annapolis sort of training and her ties there. And I think she has, the one thing we have to remember is that all the other mayors weren't really Annapolis. They didn't have the ties to Annapolis. She does. So she says, I'm going to do something. It's possible it could happen. I mean, she was was the state Senate Majority Leader. That's a powerful position.
It seems she wants to take a regional approach.
There's a lot of themes in this interview about regionalism, which I think is something that's missing entirely from the equation. We talk constantly about the problems in Baltimore as if they only are specific to Baltimore.
Right.
And as we created this geographic barrier that somehow isolates us in a way that makes us completely responsible for the narrative of failure. It's like you want to create Baltimore and put the equal sign failure. I see it in the media coverage. I've seen it as a reporter. I've heard it from people. Well, it's Baltimore. And if she can open up that dialogue and start holding other people accountable in other jurisdictions and say, all those drug addicts that are coming in the city in our 26 methadone clinics, they're county residents. it's not just Baltimore, then maybe we'll see some real change. I mean, that's probably the most positive thing about her pedigree, is that she's not from Baltimore. She's from Baltimore, but she has roots and ties to the state power mechanisms, and maybe she can leverage that to put Baltimore in a better position.
Stephen, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
This is Taya Graham and Stephen Janis for the Real News Network in Baltimore City, Maryland.